The topic of today's presentation is going to be the reproductive system. I want to mention first that I won't go over all the details. So this lecture is, the recording is going to end up being shorter than our typical 1.5 hour lecture, but it doesn't mean that you don't have to know all the details. Well, there are numbers here that, I think it's pretty intuitive that I'm not going to ask you to memorize those numbers. But otherwise, try to read through the lecture note in detail. It's actually a good idea if you read through it before you even watch this video. Okay. So I'm going to be scanning through it and pointing out the things that I feel like may need more explanation. So to start out, whether we're talking about male or female reproductive system, we have the primary sex organs, also known as the gonads, and then we also have the accessory sex organs. The primary sex organs that's a pretty simple definition. Okay, it's just testes in male and ovaries in female. Okay, and these are the primary actors in production of gametes, production of the sperm in male and production of ova or eggs in females. But they also have a very important role in production of sex hormones in adults. Okay, so this is male reproductive system. This is the primary sex organ, but everything else, okay, will be considered accessory sexual organ. And in females, the same. We have the ovary here. That's the primary sex organ in female. And then all the other things that contribute to the female reproductive system will be considered accessory sex organ. Okay. Now in this lecture, we're going to go over the male reproductive system first, followed by the female reproductive system. And as you're going to see later, especially when you get to physiology class, you're going to notice that the female reproductive system as a whole is much more complicated than the male reproductive system. Okay. I won't go over these you can go over on your own. But I do want to point out the importance that the testes are situated outside of the core body. Okay? So there's an importance of them being situated outside the body cavity, and that is because in order for them to carry out sperm production, this process known as spermatogenesis, okay, that environment that's conducive to sperm production, okay, is a lower temperature than the rest of the body. And there's condition where male infants are born with testes still left undescended inside their body cavity. And if that's not surgically fixed at birth, it could lead to them being infertile as an adult. Okay, so the importance of the testes being situated outside the body cavity is to ensure that sperm production is able to be carried out. And then there are muscles, okay, as well as vessels that help regulate the temperature of the testes in the scrotum, making sure that the heat, that excessive heat is let off. Okay, and that's something we're going to look at later. Okay, inside the scrotum, each testes is surrounded by a tunica vaginalis, and that's right here. Okay, and that's actually derived from peritoneum. Please go over the structures in here on your own. And I can post an animation for that as well. What I do want you to be able to eventually follow is the path of sperm through the male reproductive tract. Okay. Whenever I'm recording these lectures, somehow the computer kind of slows down and lags. Okay. So inside each of your testes, there are structures known as seminiferous tubules. And these seminiferous tubules are arranged in lobules. Okay. And you can see, so these tubules, seminiferous tubules, are separated by areolar connective tissue, and then they're arranged into lobules. So this is the site of sperm production. This is where sperms are made, where they arise from. Okay. And this is also the site of male hormone secretion, production and secretion. Okay. And this, if you are to take a cross section of this seminiferous tubule, this is what you're going to see. So this is a cross section. Okay. And you can see different cells in here. Okay. So what happens is, okay, so we have the apical cells here, and this is the basal cell. Similar to epithelial cells, where the cell begins to grow from the basal layer. It's the same here. So here we have cells that are progenitor cells that begin at the margin, at the border. Okay, as they differentiate and mature, okay, they move closer and closer toward the lumen. Eventually, when they get to the center of the lumen, they are now sperms. They're now sperms that are ready for release. And let me show you a quick image of that. So this is what happens. So they start out at the border and then move inward as they differentiate. Okay, and then as they go through this differentiation process, they acquire a new limb in the process. Okay, so there's spermatogonia, and then we have primary spermatids, secondary spermatids, etc., and then sperm in the center. You see how they travel through the lumen, down the lumen, eventually out of the seminiferous tubules. Okay, and then they enter the straight tubules into the ready testis. Okay. From there, they enter the efferent ductule. Okay, and then the head of the epididymis. So this whole thing is the epididymis. The head of the epididymis, okay, followed by the body of the epididymis. Okay, and then here we have the tail of the epididymis, and then eventually ascending into the ductus deferens or vas deferens. And from there, we go through the spermatic cord. So the ductus deferens travels through the spermatic cord. And that spermatic cord, okay, it's going to continue. Okay, and this dilated portion of the ductus deferens is known as the ampulla of ductus deferens. Okay, so the sperm is going to travel through here. On the way out, it's going to, the secretion from seminal gland is going to join. So seminal gland secretion gets combined and mixed with the sperm. Okay, prostate gland also contribute to the secretion. So does the bulbar urethral gland. Okay, but in any case, the sperm is traveling through the ductus deferens into the ejaculatory duct. Okay, and then through this urethra part, the first part of the urethra. So this is the prostatic urethra. Okay, and then intermediate urethra. This is a spongy urethra, and then out of the external urethral orifice. Now I want to go back to looking at this cross-section view of the seminiferous tubule. And here's a Google image that illustrates the same thing of what we're looking at. So I want to point out that aside from these spermatogenic cells, so these spermatogenic cells are the ones that which the sperms are derived from, right? And then we have cells that provide support and nutrients to make sure that these spermatogenic cells are able to function properly. Okay, and these cells are known as Sertoli cells. They are huge cells that and which the spermatogenic cells are sort of embedded within. Okay. Sertoli cells provide a number of functions. They secrete hormones, okay, under the influence of pituitary hormones. Okay. And they also secrete testicular fluid. They nourish, so provide nutrients to the spermatogenic cells and move them toward the lumen. They also form a blood-testis barrier, okay, because there are substances in the blood that we don't want to be mixed with this spermatogenic environment. Okay, we want to isolate this environment to create a special environment that's conducive to the production of sperm. Okay. Myocells are smooth muscle-like cells that surround the seminiferous tubule. Okay, and their actions, contraction can help move the sperm and testicular fluid through the tubules. Okay. Leydig cells, also known as interstitial cells. These cells, they are located in between the seminiferous tubule, so in that connective tissue. Okay, and their function is primarily to secrete male sex hormones, androgens, or testosterone in particular. And they secrete that under the influence of this hormone that's secreted by the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is a gland located in your brain. When your brain secretes, when you reach puberty and there's this production of this luteinizing hormone secreted by the pituitary gland. And that then travels through blood to get to your testes and cause the testes, and specifically your seminiferous tubules, to start producing androgens. Okay. And the pituitary gland hormone also has an effect on secretion of hormones by the Sertoli cells. So another name for Sertoli cells is cystinocytes. Okay, so on this page, we've already talked about, gone through the pathway in which the sperm cell follows, going from the seminiferous tubule to the end of the urethra. But a couple of things I want to point out. Okay, so we've talked about how the sperms arise from the seminiferous tubules in your testes, but they actually undergo maturation, further maturation, in the epididymis. So that's this part. Okay. After they undergo maturation there, they're then stored and then later transported, okay, through the ductus deferens or vas deferens. Okay, either term is fine on the practical. Okay, so during ejaculation, you're flowing through that. Okay. Okay, now the spermatic cord is this bundle of structures that includes the ductus deferens or the vas deferens, but it also contains blood vessels and nerves that supply the scrotum. Okay, now I think this portion is pretty self-explanatory. Make sure you read through this. Okay, follow through the path in which sperm would travel. Okay. Next, I want to talk about the accessory glands. There are accessory glands that contribute to semen production. Okay. The seminal gland, also known as seminal vesicle, so either term is fine on the practical. This is a gland that contributes to a major portion of the ejaculate. Okay. Another gland that contribute to that semen production is prostate gland. Okay. That's right here. And then we also have the bulbourethral, also known as Cowper's gland, located at the level of the urogenital diaphragm. Okay. Don't worry too much about what type of juice or what type of substance that each of these secrete, but know that these three contribute to semen formation. Okay, and make sure you're able to identify them and recognize, which one comes first. Seminal gland, okay, prostate gland, okay, and then bulbourethral gland. Okay. Now the male penis is actually a spongy structure. It's a very unique structure in that even though we call it a boner, but there's not really a bone inside. So what happens during male sexual response is that this structure gets engorged with blood. So blood floods in, okay, into the spongy tissue. As this is packed with blood, it becomes hard. Okay. And that's essentially what an erection is, right? And so you can see, I always tell people, look at the monkey face. Okay, so this is what the monkey face I'm talking about. So if you take a cross-section of the male penis, okay, you will see a paired structure known as the corpora cavernosa. Okay. And it's also known as the corpus cavernosum. Okay, so that's another name for it, corpus cavernosum. And this structure known as corpus spongiosum is not paired. So it's the spongy structure that directly surrounds our urethra. Okay, so if we look closer here, this part that surrounds the urethra directly is the corpus spongiosum. These are the corpora cavernosa. Singular is corpus cavernosum. Okay, and these get engorged with blood. That's what makes the penis hard during erection. Okay. Now I want to scroll down. What happened to the last view? Okay, and then you can study these other parts yourself. The foreskin, everyone knows where the glans penis is, the body of the penis, okay, the root of the penis, okay. And then spermatogenesis, once again, it's just the production of sperm. Okay, it begins in puberty and then essentially happens until death.